Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. Welcome to Climate Resilience through Gaming and Technology at the Resilience Hub, COP27. I'm Kathy Boffman-McLeod. I'm the director of the Adrienne Arsht-Rockefeller Foundation Resilience Center at the Atlantic Council. It's long. We go by Arsht-Rock for short. And today, our discussion with some pretty amazing panelists is going to be focused on how we build climate resilience through social technology and gaming. And so you all might not know, has anybody here heard of a game that was somewhat popular called Call of Duty? You see the humor in that, yes, of course. Well, the co-creator of Call of Duty is here, Chance Glasgow. And millions and millions and millions and millions of people play Call of Duty and the games that you've built since, and partners across the industry are reaching people every day with information. And so as we rush to understand how to reach people with actionable guidance, essential information, risk information, and climate survival skills, we want to reach them where they are, and they are on social media, and they are playing games. 3 billion people play games every day. Half of the players are women, and people play on their phones, and people play console games. And so a big part of our strategy at Arsht-Rock is to reach people where they are playing games with essential skills and information. And so we've made a bunch of progress, and we're going to have a fun time today talking with our partner at Meta and with Mark from Resurgence about how this all comes down. And the whole idea is acceleration. And so we don't need to build an audience. They're already there. And so how do we deliver the way we want to? I also want to preview, there's just at the end of this session, a dance session. And it's not just us dancing. They don't know it yet, actually. I'm just sharing this just now for the first. You can see they're very excited about it. But I'm counting on all of you to take part too. So we've chosen a song. Just start to loosen up, do some breathing, some stretching while we cover the session. And then we'll do a little bit of boogieing before. Yeah, and we'll cue you the music. Yeah, okay. So our panelists, as I said, Chance Glasgow, the creative director of Good Dog Studios and a non-resident senior fellow and gaming and technology advisor to Arsht-Rock. Thank you for being here, Chance. And I hope you'll plug our virtual reality experience for people to have. Great, okay. Second, we have our virtual participant, Marina Saros. She's going to make some opening comments. She's the head of sustainability at Unity Technologies. We have Mark Harvey, who's the CEO and founder of Resurgence. And we have Kaushik Sethuraman, who is the head of programs, Central Social Impact Group at Meta. So thank you all for being here. And Marina, I think we're going to go over to you for some opening comments, and then we'll get into the conversation. Thank you for joining us today. Over to you, Marina, and we are bringing you into the room as we speak. It's possible. Let's do a little bit of a... Yep, just a little bit. There we go. Okay.
All right.
And there she is. Hey, I hear you.
Hi.
Hi.
I was dancing in the background since I'm not able to be there live right now. I thought I would, pre-game that for you. So
keep moving.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Kathy. And hi, everyone. I'm really excited about the conversation that's about to take place. Games and other extended reality experiences have so much potential to address climate change, and they already are being used. So I'll just briefly touch on 3 ideas that I'm thinking about a lot these days. The first is that, as Kathy mentioned, video games are one of humanity's favorite forms of entertainment, with over 3 billion people playing. And those are people across all ages, nationalities, genders, socioeconomic statuses. And beyond just that sheer enormous reach, games occupy a really special place in our lives. They are what are often considered trusted messengers for people. They're trusted messengers of information, and they're also drivers of culture. Unity partnered with Yale University's program on climate change communications earlier this year to survey what gamers in the US think about climate change, and the results were really eye-opening for me. 7 in 10 gamers are worried about climate change, and more than 20% say that they've already seen content about climate change in games or in a gaming stream that they watch. So these numbers tell me that we have a huge constituency and that this constituency is concerned and paying attention to this issue. And we can meet people where they are, as Kathy said, and we are by using games and experiences to co-create the future. As opposed to other forms of entertainment, games are interactive. Players themselves help shape the outcomes of a game, and they're an active participant in what's happening. And that is frankly what we need a lot more of around climate change. So I think that we can leverage the interactivity of games to test, collaborate, and build real solutions in real communities. And with this, I'm thinking of games like Ahika Rangers, for example, where players in-game receive missions to complete real-world tasks. So, for example, they do endangered species counts, and that data is then provided as a citizen science partnership to the international research community. Another example is something that I've seen here in the Bay Area and other places, which is VR, basically VR design charrettes that help local communities contextualize specific resilience strategies that work in their area, like urban cooling zones or natural flood buffers in coastal communities. And my final thought is just games and XR experiences are powerful platforms for storytelling and emotional connection. We here, or where you are, here, all of us here in this virtual space, know that climate change is already causing devastating losses to the people and the species and the places and the experiences that we love. And for many people, it is overwhelming and traumatizing to confront that loss. So people often turn off or look away or try and ignore the situation that we're in. But I think that we can transform that fear and grief into knowledge and action by using the technology that we have already right now to paint and build realistically optimistic visions of a future that is worth working towards. So thank you again, Kathy, for starting this conversation, and I'm looking forward to our dance party.
It's coming. Thank you, Marina, so much for the partnership with Arsht-Rock and the great work that you're doing. And it's such a beautiful thing to find a person with deep climate adaptation expertise. Also, you have to take a look at Marina's book. Marina, plug on your book. Remind me the title.
Thank you, Kathy.
And to clearly articulate not just the fun part, but the role that it can play in processing a lot of the feelings that humans have, because this is such a devastating and massive set of issues. And so let us get into the conversation about how we do this. How do we do this? And so let me start with Chance. And what we'll do is just each of you answer this question, and that is, in one line, what actions are you taking in the work to build climate resilience in your world? Over to you. And we'll just use this one mic and pass it.
Yeah, so because there are over 3 billion people playing video games, we're taking advantage of that demographic by giving grants to game studios that are including climate resilience topics within their game. We're working with AAA publishers and large companies like Unity. And we're also, working with, any sort of climate-related games within the industry to basically support them, pretty much.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much to Arsht-Rock for having us here. Again, as Kathy mentioned, I'm Kaushik from Meta. And the answer to your question is, for us, resilience means primarily centered around how do we bring communities closer together, more tight-knit. And we have 2 products that have been around for a while, one called Crisis Response. I was just talking to Chance about it, which has been around for about 8 years, which enables people to mark themselves safe. If one of you have been in that situation where Facebook prompted you, that's one of the reasons why we try to stimulate a community to come together in times of crisis. We connect them and so on. And then another product called Climate Science Center, which is to drive awareness of climate resilience and the need for how we all should think about climate and then start thinking towards adaptation. So those are the two areas of how we think about climate resilience.
Thank you. Resurgence is working in those cities in the global south where there may be a new generation of gamers. I'm thinking of Lagos, Mumbai, where actually there's a problem. And that is the national weather agencies have focused historically on the aviation sector and the farmers, and at times the fishermen. But what they don't do is serve the city and above all the most vulnerable. And the vulnerable community in informal settlements often are the city population, up to 70%. So what we're doing is we've built a service and a partnership to meet the weather and early warning information needs of the billion living in urban informal settlements that are in that footprint that Meta is bringing its new generation of gamers up in.
I also forgot to mention we are also doing workshops for game developers. There's a lot of game developers passionate about the climate, and we're working with them so they know how to integrate some of these climate resilience topics within their games.
Yes, that's important. I will just add to that in a partnership with SEVA, which is the Self-Employed Women's Association, all of the women, 2 million women in the informal sector in several states in India play video games. And we're working together with the Gaming Association, the Game Developers Association of India, to build in essential knowledge and awareness and skills into the games they're already playing. And so we've had our first workshop, which was a real learning opportunity. Yeah. So I want to go to you, Chance, and say this is your first COP. So welcome to your first COP. And we are building content into video games and building a VR experience. So what is happening? You said a little bit about this, but I think it's important for people to understand there's a whole architecture of the gaming industry and game developers coming together. There's the SIG, and there are Gamers for Good and others. Could you talk a little bit about the efforts around the industry around climate action?
Well, I think what's interesting is that me, I'm 42 years old. First console was an Atari, then a Nintendo. Well, people that are my age, a little younger and a little older, are now getting in positions of power. They're CEOs, they're Congress people, they're senators, presidents, prime ministers, right? So now all of a sudden, the people in power of the world is taking gaming serious as a serious medium, right? And as far as the awareness goes, we're starting to see a lot of climate-focused games, right? For instance, one of the games we work with, Eco is kind of like if you took Minecraft and you added an economic model, you added a government model, and you added a climate model, and how these three models interplay, right? So for instance, in this game, you've got 100 people working together on the same server. They're trying to stop a meteor before it hits the planet, but in the process of developing the technology to stop the meteor, they are creating CO2. They're creating global warming. And so they have to collaborate together. And this is the entire game. Humans collaborating together to stop climate change on a single gaming server, right? Entire game. You're seeing other games, bigger games like Civilization include downloadable content to add green content, solar panels, green policies and whatnot. So you're just, I think gamers are a little ahead of the curve on average when it comes to climate. And so we're definitely seeing this permeate the industry much quicker than I'd say a lot of other industries.
Thank you. So to you, Kaushik, about the numbers of people that you reach, and many of them are in vulnerable communities and in developing economy contexts. What's working in those contexts? And then can you tell me what more you might do or more of that to reach more people through the social technologies you run?
Thanks. So one of the things that I often think about and tell people is Facebook products are not just about reach, but we are very interested in the relationships within that reach. And the relationship has to be of trust and of making sure that we are very sensitive to where people are and what people actually do. So with respect to this crisis response product, we're in all countries in the world where Meta is authorized to, so which excludes about 3 of them. And in all of those places, when you see the crisis, the thing that actually works for us best most is there is a product that we have called Facebook Lite, which is essentially an extremely lightweight version of Facebook that operates on extremely limited bandwidth. And that's where we see most of the vulnerable and the remote people in remote areas actually engage the product. So we are very conscious about making sure that we do not design products only in Western languages, only in places that have high 5G, and given whatever experiences here as well, but making sure that that it works. The place where we still have lots of challenges is when crisis happens, there's no electricity. There is no way for us to detect location signals. There is no way to kind of understand how some of these people can actually get access to even knowing what's going on. And so that is a tough problem. And so one of the ideas that we have, which we're trying to do, is every community that we see this notion of a community connector. I mean, that's a term we use, but you can actually see it could be a leader, it could be a set of volunteers. There's always somebody in a community who just steps up, stands up, coordinates and stuff. Yeah. And so we're trying to see how we could try to find out who these community connectors are, and then making sure that they have most of the information, and then information can permeate to people who might not have the technologies to do so right now. So that's kind of how we are thinking about it right now.
Mark, now turning to you with your early warning tool, Daraja, you're closest of the 4 of us, you're closest to the people who need it the most. What kind of technologies, including Meta and other gaming technologies, are you using and seeing promise in?
Thank you, Kathy. First of all, we are robustly agnostic about the platforms that we use. So we start very much with the user on the ground in an informal settlement, and we use a mapping tool to map the way information flows or doesn't flow from the agencies, particularly the National Weather Agencies or the Disaster Management Agency or Red Cross, to that community or that household. And we look at the channels that they trust and use, and very often there's a big disconnect. We map those channels and see what could be brought into the system. When we look at social tech, again, we're agnostic. So if we discovered, which we haven't, by the way, that TikTok was a significant channel, we would be using TikTok in deference to the user. Now, as it happens, in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, we have worked with Facebook as part of one channel, amongst others, including national community media as a trusted channel for dissemination and engagement and also awareness raising. In Jamaica, we are just about to launch with the Met Service of Jamaica a new series of forecasts and a smartphone app. And we are looking at Facebook and Instagram, in part because there's a slightly younger demographic there. Looking at Lagos, even younger demographic, Instagram plus whatever. Some of them may be Meta platforms, some of them may not be. And then lastly, so our model involves, you mentioned the community and the system, bringing actors into the system to co-design the weather forecasts and the early warnings, the icons, the language, the value-added information. WhatsApp is very important for us because that is extremely well disseminated. It has now capacity to have 500 users. You jump from 256 in the middle of the year. In Nairobi, we have 61 users, and they are the partners, including Met Agency, community leaders, media, Red Cross City Hall. So in each city that we're working in, we have a WhatsApp group who don't just disseminate, they often feed back. They may even be complaints. They might say, the weather forecast hasn't arrived. We've been having a lot of rains. When is it coming, please? So the feedback sort of dynamic and potential of an app like WhatsApp is important. So we're using Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. Jamaica's a good example where we're decentralizing the use of the WhatsApp with the Jamaica Red Cross, who have 13 branches across the island. They only have one single WhatsApp for exchanging early warning information. We're training them to how to create cascades at the province level to take on these new forecasts and the new app so they can share information and feedback. So WhatsApp is really integral to the delivery system, Facebook and Instagram are also important.
So there's a theme across all that each of you has said, and that is reaching people with information that will help them in some way in the face of climate impacts. What's the next chapter? What is the next level? Because the intensity and the impact is growing so rapidly, and we're seeing disasters coinciding with cyclones that come with heat waves, and we don't even have our arms around how fully these impacts are because we have some data deficits around the world. What's next? Let me go back to Mark, and maybe we'll come this way.
Well, what's next for Daraja, the service and partnership, is to try to bring this service to as many cities across the global south as possible through strategic partnerships with Red Cross, with Slum Dwellers International, with the WMO, to apply open tools and methodologies, but use the trusted channels. One thing that's important to us, though, is to elevate the status of user data. Now, that is something that Meta has always invested in, but actually the disaster risk reduction within the sector has tended to privilege a certain kind of data, which is about, exposure, its hazard, vulnerability data. There's less interested in user data. If we look at India, there's about 175 million people living in informal settlements. We need data analysis on where they are, what channels they receive information from, what their linguistic preferences are, their ethnicities. That is a data challenge. So we need to what's next for us is to build our data analytics capacity to handle that kind of data, which has historically been underprivileged by the disaster risk reduction sector.
Yeah, that's amazing, Mark. Few areas. One is in the space of providing climate awareness and information. We want to make sure that we translate this Climate Sense Center into more of action. So we are experimenting a product called Pledges, which is enabling a feature within groups, Facebook groups. So where a group admin can enable this feature, and a community can take a pledge with respect to climate mitigation. For example, the group can basically say, hey, let's reduce food wastage, let's reduce the use of plastic and so on. We tested it and found that individually this was very complicated to do. People weren't resonating and relating to it. So the community option seems to be a very good option for us to go do that. On the crisis response side, we want to do three things. One is we currently operate a product only when a crisis actually hits. We want to try to get into the space to work with people like the WMO and also Daraja and so on to see how we can start getting more into the preparation phase, as we call it, or in the alert phase. The second area is we are right now managing a complex combination of about 40 different crisis categories: floods, fires, storms, tsunamis, cyclones, and so on. But just as I was talking to Chance, we want to see how we can explore that and move that into other areas like heat waves, drought conditions, and so on. They're very different because they are longer duration and they're spread out a lot more than these point-in-time incidents. And last but not least, in the crisis category, we also want to get into the adaptation phase. So we get on approximately, say, 1 million users that come to these crisis pages within 24 hours. So we have an enormous amount of people who come in, and not all of them are in the crisis area, right? But we have this audience, and we want to enable them to understand what are some of the adaptation kits, adaptation models that they can do. Because we don't want to launch that same product in the same intensity to the same community again. I mean, that's our goal. Our goal is to not keep, celebrating the engagement of this kind of crisis product. So the more we help in the adaptation phase, and we hope that it reduces the impact that people would have, later on. So again, from the awareness space, we want to do some things to more call to action. And on the crisis space, we want to get more into the preliminary stage and also the post-crisis stage where we can help communities rebuild.
Yeah, there's a lot of new technologies developing in the gaming industry. For instance, augmented reality, virtual reality, and what's cool about augmented and virtual reality is that you can allow gamers or players or users to actually visualize the impacts of certain decisions. Right? You can go somewhere and see, okay, what would happen What would Greenland look like if the world was 2 degrees more warmer Celsius, right? And speaking of which, we have a virtual reality experience. You can come see it tomorrow at 10 a.m. Where we are showing a little prototype we put together with literally one developer to show the potential impacts of certain policy decisions. And we intend to develop this further into something that we can show to future world leaders, current world leaders, just to have the visualization, because the thing about the potential climate impacts, they're so grand, they're so large, that it's hard to fathom, what that would look like. What would it look like with food shortages? What would it look like, if the sea level was 1 or 2 feet higher? All these different things. We can use gaming engines like Unity to put people in those locations and actually see it and visualize it. We're seeing a lot of, even though, say, blockchain is a little bit of the boogeyman amongst environmentalists, with newer blockchain, with newer Ethereum, with using very little electricity, games are starting to use tokens, and you could actually make a token that would be carbon negative by offsetting, right? So even though right now, the blockchain technology in games historically has used way too much energy, every year we're finding new ways to actually not just bring it from the energy hog that, say, Bitcoin is. There's actual coins out there that are produced only because, for instance, you have solar panels and you get coins from producing solar energy, right? And these are finding their ways into games. So you could have a game that you're literally saving the planet by playing it, because you're creating maybe carbon offset tokens, right? And this is a little bit more further in the future, but I think we're going to see some real interesting developments in that area.
Thank you. So one of the things I wanted to take a minute with you, Chance, and ask, when we had our first conversation, and I also want to recognize my colleague who's not here at COP, Rose Mann, for her genius and vision of finding your partnership and seeing how we could reach people through gaming with resilient solutions, and my colleague Nidhi Upadhyaya, who put our panel together and is leading so much of this work. So thank you to Rose and Nidhi. That we met and we went to Full Sail University and we met you and we had ideas, and you said immediately, no, stop. You tell us what you want people to do. Don't try to build a game because you're not going to make it fun. So you do the science-backed interventions and what you want, and then give it to us and we'll make it fun. And so could you talk about that part? Because there's such an interesting thing there. Of course, there are games that people play that are educational games. They're helping kids learn their times tables and things like that. That's not exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about people already playing games and getting some things infused in them. I mean, of course, we're talking about VR and other things, but could you just talk about that? Because that was really educational for us. We had a light bulb of saying, this is not an educational app. I mean, this has got to be fun. And then when you're talking about a blockbuster like Call of Duty or Fortnite, it's got to be killer, pardon the pun, and yeah, and we're not doing first-person shooter type games. I just want to make that clear. That's not what we're doing. So it's not killer like that. So over to you.
So there's different ways that, like, for example, can I plug my game I'm working on with the heat wave stuff? All right. So I'm working on a game called Martial Arts Tycoon. And you don't want to make a game an educational game. You want to make a game that just happens to passively educate people. As soon as you say, hey, do you want to play this educational game? They're like, oh, it must be really boring. I don't want to learn. Because people don't like, I don't want to go home after work, sit back and learn. That's not what we're doing. So for instance, in our game, we're making a game that is about building and managing martial arts gyms from the favelas of Brazil, right? So you start off teaching Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and you're outside, you're on the rooftops training people. And so we have an actual temperature system we've built into the game. We took the median temperatures of Rio de Janeiro throughout the year, and based on what the date is, right, it will generate the temperature, but there's a small chance that there's a heat wave. Maybe there's a 3% chance there's a heat wave. And so let's say there is a heat wave in the game. You have to do things to protect your fighters, to protect the people you're training from the heat. You can install coverings to give them shade. You can install misters, give them ways to have hydration, water fountains, and whatnot, right? Well, what happens in the game if you don't protect your fighters from the heat? For instance, depending on the category of the heat wave, we're using the Arsht-Rock developed system of categories 0, 1, 2, and 3, correct? And the game will actually tell you it's a Category 2 heat wave, and its name is Chiago, right? And if you don't protect your fighters, what will happen, we roll the dice to see what happens to each individual character in the game. There's a small chance that someone might have heat exhaustion, and then they're training in the martial arts, and they just kind of pass out for a bit, and they don't finish the class, they don't get much experience because they're unconscious. There's a very small chance that they can get a heat stroke. Well, what happens when you get heat stroke? Well, heat stroke will actually affect the character's dexterity or agility, their ability to have motor skills. And you'll have a permanently damaged character in your game that is going to have a hard time just doing regular things because they had a stroke. It goes further, though. We have rain in the game, right? So imagine it rains. We know in the game it's rained, and we look at the temperature, and we take the temperature and the rain, and we say, is there a chance that the uncleaned puddles of rain on the rooftops would spawn mosquitoes, right? Small chance you get mosquitoes. And so if you didn't hire a janitor to clean up the water from the rain, there's a chance you'll get mosquitoes, and those mosquitoes carry dengue fever, and they carry Zika. You don't want your fighters to have dengue fever or Zika, right? So what will happen is we tie in all these different climate systems, and we're adding climate systems that would make sense within the game. We're not necessarily touching on, earthquakes. We're in Brazil, right? We're touching on the things that actually affect the vulnerable characters in the game. We even look at their age. If they're over 55, we're going to have a higher chance that whether it's Zika or dengue fever or a heat stroke occurs, right? So it's interesting, and all these things fit within the game in a way that doesn't feel like it was placed there by some NGO, right?
That's great. So I'm going to come to the audience for Q&A, but let me just ask a quick question. What is the thing that is keeping you from scale? What's the thing that you, and really quickly so we can have a conversation with the audience, but I want to start with Mark. I'll pass it down, and then Kaushik, if you go too. What's the biggest barrier or the thing that you need to reach where the people you want to reach?
I would say two things. One is global strategic partnerships, including one around technology and helping us develop technology to deal with this huge issue around data analytics on user preferences. Number one, so those partnerships. Number two is a financial model that, and you will be interested in this in the gaming space, what is the return on investment in avoided, behaviors that actually avoid losses? How is money or how is money saved, health protected, or property protected? So we've got a very good benefit cost ratio through communities repairing roofs in advances of storms, moving their possessions to safer places. They've said how much it saves of their monthly income. We need to do that at scale and create a cost-benefit model that is financeable in a different way, away from foundations, away from government, international aid. Those two things, partnerships and a financial model.
That's amazing. From a scale perspective from Meta standpoint, I think the big challenge is the attention span that we get from users. People have so many channels, like you already heard here. There's the gaming aspect, there's TikTok, there's a whole bunch of other options that you have on technology. So the idea more than scale is like, how do you reach the right person at the right time with the right signal such that they can take action very quickly, whatever the action that they might need to do. I think that's the biggest area. The second one is as WhatsApp, which is part of Meta, has taken off and accelerated. So is the level of encryption, and so is the level of security that product has. And because of that, there is absolutely no information that we have with respect to who the users are and where they are, and there's no location information. And so you have these signal asymmetry, right, where you have people on networks, but you're not going to be able to reach them, at least from a source standpoint. So kind of managing that complexity would be very interesting from a scale standpoint. So.
That's really interesting. So let me turn to the audience for some questions of the panelists. Questions, sir? And if you just want to tell me what it is, I'll repeat it for the online folks. regroup. I'm going to give you the mic.
Thank you. See, yeah. I'm Pedro from Brazil, and I would like to thank the panel to the efforts to inform and to be part of the change. But I want to make a counterpoint. Today in Brazil, we are facing a huge movement of misinformation about political facts and also environmental and climate facts that occurs through the meta platforms, through Facebook, through WhatsApp, and through Instagram. And how do you face this contradiction, this ambiguity inside the meta?
Yeah, no, the question, just to clarify, are you asking about misinformation on Facebook platforms, or are you asking about misinformation that happens on social media and how it's represented in gaming? Can you just clarify? Yes. Okay. On Facebook platforms? Yes. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. No, thank you so much for that question. Yeah, and we are here at this conference for three things, and it's a great question because the third thing that we're here for at this conference is also the misinformation. So we are actively working with the Disinformation Coalition and essentially trying to see how we can do steps better and more across the platforms to reduce the aspect of misinformation. In terms of what we actually do today, there are three broad steps of addressing misinformation. One of it is building machine learning models that basically constantly learn and track the different ways by which misinformation, or what we call bad actors, essentially try to seed that into the system. And so that constantly does, and it's a never-ending process. The second one is, after it goes to that, we have content moderators, specifically who look at content both proactively as well as information that comes from different, from the community itself to say, hey, you might want to watch out for that. We also have a tag that shows up on a lot of these information which we believe is suspect, because we also believe that the platform is fair game for people to share their opinions, but we do add that label to say, hey, you might want to watch out that this piece of information may not be accurate or up to date. And the third piece is, we are constantly trying to work with partners, like Mark mentioned, strategic partnership is a very important part. Each of the aspects of misinformation is different. Like you said, what happens in Brazil is not the same as what happens in other countries. And so we're constantly working with, through our policy team, to figure out what is the lie of the land, or what is the type of things that actually happens, and to try to bring it together. So it's a constant ongoing process that has both human element, machine element, and also working with partnerships with the government in order to try to address it. So.
Just very briefly, I would add that the social tech is an important part of the digital social sphere, and it's not the whole of it. Journalism and independent journalism is a very important part, and it's good to see my colleague Lisa Robinson from BBC Media Action here, who's working, BBC Media are working with journalists and national media to support journalists for better climate coverage. So that is also essential, and that's essential to our model in Daraja, is to involve community, city and national media who can report effectively on climate, but also act as channels for public service information. So social tech is an important part of the picture because you are in effect broadcasters, but it's not the whole picture.
Hi, I'm Pen Cabot. I'm Business Development Director at the Walker Institute at University of Reading, and I'm also a new board member of Resurgence, very proudly. What I have seen living and working, especially across sub-Saharan Africa, is that there's a lot of stuff being developed that's supposed to serve the poorest of the poor and the most vulnerable, but often when it relies on tech, platforms or digital or smartphones, it's not really designed to serve the audience. There's still massive digital poverty, globally, really, but particularly amongst the most vulnerable. So what does the panel think about that? You know, which other partners need to be brought in to close that gap in order to really effectively deliver these kinds of solutions at scale, but consistently? Because some people may have data for a week and then they run out and then they can't afford to top it up again. So, you know, how are we going to tackle the digital divide, which still really separates the rich from the poor?
So one of the things that, you know, through the efforts we've done through gaming is we realized that there is a particular segment of the population that's not, you know, on a Pixel 7 or an iPhone 14, right? They have phones, they have cell phones, but they might be monochrome, text-based, old-school phones. And while that number is going down, it's still a significant amount of the population, typically closer to like the equator, right? So one of the things that we would like to do is partner with, I guess, countries that are not as economically well off, and use, say, for instance, text SMS-based gaming. These actually exist, games over SMS, and they're very simple. And obviously, they're not going to be quite as interactive as, say, something on a PC or a video game console, but they are kind of fun little choose-your-adventure type of things, and there's lots of flies here. I'm trying to get rid of them. But anyways, yeah, so just using, going to them, you know, going to developing stuff that actually functions on the hardware that they do have access to, right?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. One of the things that we worked as a company in the past is with mobile operators. I know it's still technology, and it's still related to that. I also talked a little bit about the Facebook Lite experience. But in addition to that, one of the things that we have found is the notion of a community center. Most of these places that you talk about somehow has at least a healthcare-based community center. And so we try to see if we can mobilize through, say, WhatsApp bots or even like the WhatsApp network to reach a community member of that center and then have it go through word of mouth, whatever it might be. I know it's not entirely climate related, but it is related to health. So one of the big things that we did in South Africa is something called a maternal healthcare approach through our health vertical, which is also part of social impact, where we looked at you know, women who are you know, pregnant with their first child, maybe 6 months pregnant on, and we started connecting with them or through the community center, through the WhatsApp bot, so that it gives them bits of information on a cadence that they actually wanted, so that a healthy mom is a healthy child's family, and the economics, and so on and so forth. So we are trying our best to kind of figure it out in those kind of mechanisms as well. So.
Hello, thank you very much. This is a question for Meta. So just around resilience planning, it'd be interesting to know if you have any resilience planning for physical climate risks within Meta. In the instance of climate shocks, are your data centers protected? What would happen? Yeah, just be interested to know that. Thank you.
No, thank you for that question. Yeah, so one of the, I'm from the product team that develops products on the Meta's you know, platform, but we do have an entirely other team called sustainability. And the sustainability team works exactly to answer your question. And so every data center we think is part of the community itself. And so most of the aspects about, you know, carbon reduction, getting net zero, using, you know, sparingly using water for cooling of the data centers. In addition to that, making sure that the type of resiliency that they're building with the data centers, including different forms of, you know, cement and concrete. I mean, these are information that I actually, you know, vaguely know of, but I do know they also are sharing that with the community. So the type of resilience that we're trying to build in the data centers is something that we're importing. We do also do community-based outreach. So small and medium businesses, they are the backbone of every small community. And so as a data center, we're not just there to say we are hosting the data, thank you, but we're saying, hey, we will do outreach through our Boost program, where we empower the small and medium businesses to understand what it means to be on Facebook as a page or as a group. How do they kind of take advantage of the advertising system, and also encouraging them to kind of be a part of the overall social impact fabric. So, thank you.
This will be our last question, and then I've got one quick lightning round for the panel.
Hi, good evening. My name is Delaney Reynolds. I am a environmental scientist and graduate student at the University of Miami, pursuing a joint PhD and law degree. Also a lifelong gamer. So my question is, PhD and law degree in environmental science and policy. Yeah, actually through the program that Mrs. Mann used to be with. So my question is, in game development and in your corporations, on the back end, what is the process of getting this information related to climate change, the science? Not that I'm suggesting it's not credible, I'm just curious as a scientist myself, where that comes from, and then how you decide what to integrate and what not to.
So I'm not a climate expert. I'm learning every month, every year that I'm working with Arsht-Rock. I'm a gaming expert, but everyone else, for the most part, in our center is a climate expert. So I'm like, hey, Jorge, what about this? Cool, and there we go. More or less, it's more complex than that, but basically I'm surrounded by a lot of people that are way smarter than me in climate science, and I make sure I utilize those people's minds.
No, thank you, it's a very important question. So for one of the products, I'll use an example, it's probably better to illustrate. So if you look at the Climate Science Center today on Facebook, what we call our authoritative sources of information, that's who we get it from. So IPCC, and then we work with every authoritative source in each specific country to stitch that information. We get emissions from someplace, we get temperature increase from the scientific community. And so there is a group called the policy team within a corporation like ourselves. And so that policy team works closely with the partnerships, with the government entities to make sure that the sources of information that we seek and get, could be the WMO, the World Meteorological Organization, and so on, are all vetted, trusted aspects of it before we actually show it. And the second most important thing to your question is it's not just about getting that, but attribution. So we want to make sure that we attribute the source, because the time, effort, and energy and resource that goes into each of these organizations from getting that information, we want to make sure that all the credit, all the visibility goes to that particular organization. And so we want to be a channel or a conduit, not just sharing that information out and throwing it out, so that there is a relationship that can be built with the sources and with the users in however way that they want to engage with. So.
Yes. We are not climate scientists or meteorologists. Our process is to connect those scientists, and very often the meteorologists are IPCC scientists, such as the Kenya head of the principal meteorologist is an IPCC scientist. We are working with her to create the system in Nairobi so that actually the forecasts and new information, seasonal forecasts and trend data can be fed into that system, is intelligible to all users, including the managers of the transport and other infrastructure services, and the communities in the appropriate language and the format, and at times, and that there's a feedback mechanism back to the producers of that climate information. So we are most interested in creating that system and the service that keeps it going.
Yes, to the lightning round. Now, the question is, what's the one thing that people can do to build their climate resilience through technology, social technology, or gaming? So Mark, why don't we start back with you and we'll bring it about this way.
It's actually two things, I would say. It's to build an app group for your family and friends, right, and communicate through that, but also build an analog app group, because I've seen what happened in Japan after the 2011 earthquake with the most digitally enabled society. When all the infrastructure collapsed, everything went analog. So you need an analog WhatsApp group and a plan for when you are no longer connected. How do you meet your family? Where's your meeting place, right? And that analog plan needs to be wrapped in polythene, right? Yes? So you need your digital app group for your family and friends, and you need the analog app group and the plan.
Thank you. I think one of the things we really want to try to have people do is, people tend to think these words, adaptation, is something so complicated, something which is so far away. And I know Chan's also mentioned this some time back, that We just don't want people to think that it's some unachievable goal. And so anything that you see, either information that you see in social experiences, or a feature that you see in a gaming app, or a survey that you take somewhere, we want you to think about that as you're already in the adaptation space. You're already doing things towards that climate change. And I think we want to do that more as a company as well, so that we all feel that we are already starting to contribute. Otherwise, we feel like something has to come from somewhere before we actually reach that spot. But every small thing that we tend to do also already starting to contribute, and we just need to make people more aware of that. That's what I would say. That do your own part. Don't think that it's something so grandiose that has to be done before you actually get there.
So I'd say if you're into gaming yourself, then look at the games, our games, and games we're not even working with that basically touch on these climate resilience topics, whether it's the few that we've granted money to or the many other games that are touching on these things. And if you're not a gamer yourself, then maybe there's someone in your life, kids, nephews, whatever, and maybe buy them something, right? Because bottom line is these games are mostly financed by really large corporations that like to make lots of money. And if you're making these corporations money for putting climate resilience in their games, they're going to keep putting climate resilience in their games. So you kind of have to play their game, right? You got to meet them where they're at, and you show them the money, and it'll keep showing up in games. So
It's pretty straightforward. So let me see if there are any last questions before we get to the dancing part of this panel. No, you don't. No one has to dance, but you probably want to stay to watch other people dance, because that's usually very entertaining. So let me thank our panel for the insights and for foreshadowing what will be one of the biggest ways that we can reach people with climate survival information of all kinds. And I think we're just at the beginning of this, and these technologies converge with all sorts of skills, including financial literacy and risk literacy and actions that people take. But one of the biggest challenges is getting people to change their behavior. And while we try to change the system and reduce emissions to sustain our life on this planet, we'll have to come up with some hacks. And this is a great one to reach billions of people. So thank you to Mark Harvey, to Kaushik, and to Chance, I know who you are. It's been a long day, long week, for being with us and for sharing your thoughts. And now to the dance portion. And clapping. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right, here we go. Everybody shake.